Hi, everyone. We are here today to attend the Keynote 2 session entitled Artificial Intelligence in Teaching and Learning in conjunction with NALI 2021 with the theme of Humanizing Artificial Intelligence in Education. NALI 2021 is organized by University Technology Malaysia, UTM, through UTM Academic Leadership, UTM Lead, School of Chemical and Energy Engineering, in collaboration with Jabatan Pendidikan Negeri Johor, Kementerian Pendidikan Malaysia. My name is Qsina, your moderator for today's keynote session. With us today, we have our honorable speaker, Associate Professor Dr. Inge Molenaar from Radboud University. She will deliver a keynote speech titled Artificial Intelligence in Teaching and Learning. And for information, the attendance link will be given in the middle of the session. Before we start this session, I would like to read the biography of our honorable speaker. Dr. Inge Molenaar is an Associate Professor Educational Science at the Behavioural Science Institute at Radboud University in the Netherlands. She has over 20 years of experience in the field of technology, enhanced learning, taking multiple roles from entrepreneur to academic. Her research in the Adaptive Learning Lab focuses on technology and power innovation to optimize students' learning. The application of data, learning analytics, and artificial intelligence to understand how learning unfolds over time is central in her work. Artificial intelligence offers a powerful way to make new steps towards measuring, understanding, and designing innovative learning resources. Dr. Molenaar envisions hybrid human systems that augment human intelligence with artificial intelligence to empower learners and teachers in their quest to make education more efficient, effective, and responsive. In this endeavor, collaboration between government, schools, research, and industry is essential to develop the next generation educational system. Dr. Molenaar has also received an ERC Starting Grant to develop the first hybrid human AI recognition system to train learners' self-regulated learning skills with the help of AI, and she also recently became a Jacob Foundation Fellow. Dr. Molenaar holds master's degree in cognitive psychology and international business study at Maastricht University and a PhD in educational science at the University of Amsterdam. Without further ado, I would like to invite Associate Professor Dr. Inge Molenaar to deliver her speech. Doctor, the floor is yours now.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here. And I would like to thank UTM for organizing this very interesting event with this very powerful theme. So it's my pleasure to be here, and I'm also welcoming you in Malaysia. Do I share my slides?
Yeah, sure.
Here they are. Good. Thank you very much. Yeah, it works. So this was my wake up this morning, and it's actually only 10 minutes ago. So as you see, the weather in the Netherlands is slightly different than the weather in Malaysia today. We actually had snow this morning, and it's very early morning for me. So I'm very pleased to be here and talk to you about AI and education. And what I will be doing during this talk is talk about the role of AI in education and how that is transforming our education system. I'll be introducing the 6 levels of automation for personalized learning models, which positions different developments of artificial intelligence on a scale so that we can better understand where we stand, where we want to go, and what the consequences are of the transitions that we're making. I will position existing learning technologies with AI as an example on the model. And then I'll move on to discussing the frontiers of development of artificial intelligence in education. So where are we today versus where we will be tomorrow? And finally, I will very shortly touch upon the concept of hybrid human AI regulation, just to get a little bit of an idea of what we're working on in the lab. This, to me, could be an interactive keynote, so I'd be very pleased to hear your questions via the chat, which we will discuss in the end. But please do not reserve the questions until the end. Please just post them in the chat so that we'll have a nice set of questions in the end to talk about this. And also, I have a number of questions integrated in the keynote. So if you're interested in answering those, we can discuss that at the end of the keynote as well. So please interact, even though we're not here live. This platform has lots of interaction possibilities as well. AI in education. There are a number of important drivers that we have seen around AI in education developing the last 5 years. And one is that increasingly we see one device per student across the board, across the globe. So this is really the current setting. And with the pandemic, we even increased the number of devices per student more. And so there's many students that actually have the ability to interact on devices that can include learning environments that have AI in education in them. Then there's another important step that has developed over the last few years, and that is the understanding of the power of data to explain learning. So this is really the developments that we've seen in artificial intelligence, but also in learning analytics, really focusing on the power of large set of data that can help us understand how students evolve through their learning process. And this insight is really important to think about the actions that then will follow and help to drive different AI systems that we are currently developing. And then the last driver for this particular development is the availability of learning technologies with learning analytics and artificial intelligence at scale. So what we see is an increased number of learning technologies that really are capable of wider usage and can be applied across the board at universities and at schools using these learning analytics and AI techniques within their systems. And that really allows us to move towards a new stage where we're really trying to push towards using artificial intelligence and learning analytics at scale in education. Now, if we think about AI in education, and if we think about AI at large, we oftentimes have the vision of the self-driving car. This is really the hallmark of artificial intelligence in education. And in the self-driving car, it is absolutely clear what the role of AI will be, namely to offload this very busy lady here on top and give her all the time and space to engage in those activities that are more important to her at the time. And with offloading driving, we're actually creating a lot of extra time and space for people to engage in things that they find more important, which may actually be learning. Now, in learning, that is really quite different, because if one thing is absolutely sure, we're not going to be offloading learning. Learners will still be learning by themselves, and they still have to create their own knowledge and concepts. So at best, artificial intelligence is going to optimize learning and support learners to engage in those learning activities that are most effective and efficient for them. So the application of AI in education is profoundly different from many other fields, because we're actually optimizing a process as opposed to offloading or transferring a full task from humans to artificial intelligence. And the same holds true if we think about teaching. Teaching is a profoundly social activity, and so is learning. And the interaction between humans among each other in teaching and learning is very critical for success. And so also from a teacher perspective, it is highly unlikely that we'll offload teaching to artificial intelligence. What is an interesting question, though, is how we can develop systems that integrate artificial intelligence in human teaching in such a way that these teachers and the artificial intelligence system are going to reinforce each other. And there are many different scenarios in which we can ensure that. So also, as with learning, we're not offloading learning. Same with teaching. We're not offloading teaching to artificial intelligence. What we are trying to do is find optimal situations in which artificial intelligence can reinforce and augment human intelligence. And for learners, this is particularly important because there are essential learning processes, such as the regulation of your own learning, controlling and monitoring your activities, that are critical for your development of your knowledge. So when we're developing these systems, it's really important to use a psychological, didactical view on how artificial intelligence can support learning and ensuring that we're not offloading critical processes that are in fact at the heart of learning and knowledge development for humans. So that's one aspect. The other aspect with teachers is that we really think about the critical role of humans in teaching and in human-human interaction, and how we can support that critical role with smart systems that really help us drive forward in our interaction with each other in learning and in educational institutions. So without offloading, the hybrid intelligence paradigm is a really important paradigm to ground our thinking around artificial intelligence in education in. And this hybrid intelligence paradigm presumes that there are critical relationships between human intelligence and artificial intelligence, and their critical strengths. So humans are generally very good in interacting with other humans, optimizing human interaction, social and creative dialogue, and supporting other humans. And artificial intelligence systems are good in analyzing large sets of data, integrating that into diagnostic systems, and extracting understanding, very quick understanding of how students learn and what are critical aspects in this learning. And these two aspects can reinforce each other. So the idea of hybrid intelligence is that we optimize human intelligence and human functioning with the advantages of artificial intelligence and really try to build a system that collaboratively increases learning and teaching for humans. Now, in order to get our heads around how that can function, we'll go back to the actual self-driving car and the analogy of the self-driving car. The Worldwide Association of Car Industry has developed a model towards these self-driving cars in order to understand better what the steps are that we're taking towards a fully autonomous self-driving car. And this model is really quite well done because it acknowledges a level as it was before self-driving cars, where we have the human in control of everything, versus a situation where the actual car is in control of everything and the car is fully autonomously driving. Now, as you can see above here, there are different layers in the interaction between the human and the self-driving car. So at first, the human is still monitoring driving, and this is the stage that we're still in. And in the later stages, the monitoring will actually transfer increasingly towards the car. Now that means that initially we have assisted understanding. So we help drivers with additional information to improve their driving, for instance, with additional information in the car with lights in order to see that there are cars approaching. Then we'll have different systems that take over little tasks of the driver, like, for instance, controlling speed in cruise control or staying within the lines, what you see in many cars already developing currently today. And then the human driver can take off a little bit more monitoring. And then we're transferring into cars that can actually oversee particular situations. So they're capable of driving on a highway, but not so much within the city. And then we're slowly moving into situations where the system can actually alert the driver to engage in driving when the situation becomes too complex for the system. So what you see here is an analogy that we can also use in education. From fully human driving towards an autonomous system for learning, and different stages in between in which there is an interaction between the artificial intelligence and the actual driver. So using this model, when I was writing the book for the Education Outlook for the OECD, I translated this model into a model for education. And that looks like this. Again, we see the human controls on the left side, with human teachers in control, and the autonomous teaching system on the right side, with the AI system being in control. And in between, we see the different layers at which there is an interaction between artificial intelligence and human teachers. Now, important here, we see the control of humans monitoring the system, envisioned by their eyes. And we see the actual hands on the system indicating how much actual control teachers are still executing over this educational scenario. Underneath, we see different layers of data coming in. And as we grow towards more advanced AI systems, we see that more data is needed in order to feed the system, in order to understand what students are engaging in and what they're capable of. And in between, there are different layers that indicate the different levels of human AI interaction. Now, before I dive into this model and start explaining it with examples so that it becomes a little bit more feasible and understandable, I'd like to highlight that there is not necessarily one layer that's better than the other. So this is not a model that tries to impose a fully autonomous system. The model is really developed in order for us to be able to talk about the different levels of artificial intelligence in education and help us think about the important features within these different levels and different degrees of automation. And as such, it's not a value-driven model. There can be as much AI in teacher assistance as there is in a high automation model. So let me explain different layers in order for you to get a little bit better feel for the model as it is. The first layer is the actual teaching assistance layer. So remember in the car, this was the actual information that helps the driver improve its driving. And in a similar vein, in education, we can think about this as the actual assistance information given by the system in order to help the teacher understand the educational construct better. Or if we replace the teacher by the learner, help the learner understand his own or her own learning process better. At this layer, the teacher still has full control, as is envisioned by the hands as well as the eyes on top of the graphic. And there's usually a limited number of data streams supporting this. Now, examples of this are, for instance, teacher dashboards. In this level, the system describes and it mirrors student behavior. So it really provides teachers with in-depth information about how their students are developing across their courses. And this information really helps teachers to enact more control in the didactical scenarios that they are teaching. So what you see here is an example of an adaptive learning technology that is used widely in the Netherlands in primary education. And it really nicely shows how students are going across all the different exercises that they are making. And this can either be exercises that everybody in the class is making or that are particularly adapted to the need of the individual student. And within this overview, teachers can really see which students are still growing. So here is your AI algorithm, and which students need help and need additional support. And then if you dive into the particular information about different students, you can actually see how their development is going and also on which topics they in fact need additional support and need you as a teacher to interact with them. So this is just one example of teacher assistance. There are multiple examples of dashboards with different degrees of artificial intelligence embedded in these dashboards that really can help teachers understand the development of their students to a far larger extent than they can just do when they're standing in front of a class or when they're interacting with students alone. So in this layer, the system describes and monitors the behavior, provides that back to the teacher, and the teacher executes control in the didactical scenario in order to enact on this information. Now, if we take one step further, if we go one step further, we go to partial automation. And in partial automation, we see that the technology actually controls very specific, very small tasks. So it starts to actually take over some tasks from the teacher or from the learner in order to improve the learning process. So the teacher still monitors, the eyes are still wide open, and still has a large extent of control interacting with the system, but for very specific tasks, the technology can actually support the system and take over. An example of partial automation can be at multiple levels. So let me take you through a few. Here, for instance, we see a technology that is used in museums for museums education, and it actually has a vision technology that can recognize particular aspects of the painting and then provide students with additional information of particular important aspects based on the actual graphic and the interaction with what the student is interested in knowing. So here the visual object is the artificial intelligence. Here below we see a language learning app in which we use object recognition. So the actual app is capable of recognizing, in this case, the chair, and then can help students provide chair in different languages, or as we have developed this here in a application in the lab, for sign language in order to learn how to sign. So here we see different little modules of artificial intelligence being integrated in the technology, helping the technology to recognize the context of the student and to better interact with that context as students go along their learning journey. This here is another example. This is an adaptive learning technology also used in the Netherlands. And what we see here is that the tasks that students are working on are actually adjusted to the knowledge progress, to the learning progress of the students. So what we see here is that selecting the next task for the student is no longer standardized, but is taken over by the artificial intelligence based on the diagnosis of the student's knowledge. So from the knowledge, the best next practicing task is selected in order for students to engage in deliberate practice within the zone of proximal development. So what we see in partial automation is that the system describes, it diagnoses to some extent, and it enacts very small tasks for the human learner or for the human teacher. Furthermore, it's of course very important that these systems also notify teachers on what the next steps are and how teachers can best interact with the system. Now, from this partial automation, where we see a lot of applications today, we can move towards conditional automation. And here we see an increased authority of the system. So the system will take off multiple tasks from the teacher, and a broader set of tasks are underheld or taken over by the technology. It's important again that the technology clearly signals when the teacher control is needed. So because it's taking over more tasks, that interaction is becoming increasingly more important. And the teacher incidentally monitors the system. It doesn't need to monitor all aspects because the AI is taking over some of that. But it does allow teachers to take over control at all times. So there's really this ongoing stage between where the artificial intelligence is monitoring and controlling and where the teacher is stepping in. And again, we can, of course, replace the teacher by the human learner and also say, okay, when the system takes over tasks from the human learner, it also engages in this level. Examples of conditional automation are, for instance, intelligent tutoring systems, where we see the system take over two different aspects within the learning arrangement. It takes over the elaborate feedback that students need. So when mistakes are being made, it analyzes the misconceptions or the problems that students face addressing a particular solution and provides them not only with the information whether the answer was correct or incorrect, but also how to remediate that problem and move forward in their learning. So it explicitly connects the answer of the student to the actual next step a student should take and helps them in that way with elaborate feedback. Now, from research, we know that it's important to know when you make mistakes. That's knowledge of results feedback. But it's increasingly more important to also understand how to remediate those mistakes. So really understand this elaborate feedback step and stepping forward based on the mistakes that you've made while you were practicing. Now, these type of systems are capable of doing that. There's another level of task that these systems typically overtake from teachers. So it's both the elaborative feedback, but also how to move forward. So what is the next step that this student should be learning? What is the next learning goal or next learning topic that is within the realm of understanding of this student? And so it takes over the organization of the curriculum to some extent from the teacher to the artificial intelligence. So both the step feedback, the adaptive feedback, as well as the control over how long the learner works on a learning objective and what the next learning objective should be for this particular learner is really organized by the system. And with that, the system takes a much larger role in enacting the actual learning scenario for students. So it no longer only describes and diagnoses, but it also enacts a large part of the tasks. Again, very important that the system also actively monitors, notifies, and advises teachers on how to interact with the system. It's really important to note that systems always have a restricted view on how students are developing, whereas teachers have a much richer view. So this interaction between the human teacher and the artificial intelligence stays increasingly important, or maybe even more important within these more advanced systems, because they really could drive and reinforce each other. Now, next to intelligent tutoring systems, another form of conditional automation is double teaching. And these are scenarios that are especially developing within Asia. The scenario is actually a teacher that works with a script and an artificial intelligence that observes the class and sees the interaction of the class with the teacher. It optimizes the actual scripts of the lesson and thereby orchestrates the classroom. And that gives the teacher space to provide individual feedback to particular students and help students in that very important social interaction that we see during learning. So here again, you see that the system helps the teacher taking over a number of tasks and also provides space for that teacher to really enact those tasks that are critical of human support. So that's the conditional automation. Then there is a level that's called high automation. And this is where the technology increasingly controls the tasks, or ideally even most tasks that are being executed. Of course, it still requests teacher control and monitoring when needed. If the system doesn't oversee the situation or it encounters situations where it cannot really understand or diagnose the existing problems. And teachers' control and monitoring is not required for specific tasks, so teachers can step back a little bit further, but for very specific tasks, they can still step in. Now, to be totally honest, there are not that many systems currently available that actually have this level of automation. And there's one system that I think comes relatively close, although in a very specific field. And this is a presentation trainer that is developed by the Open University. And what it does, it helps you practice your presentation skills. So it registers your pose, your tone of voice, your speech, and helps you with direct feedback while you are practicing in front of this system. And so the system takes a large set of data, transforms it into different artificial intelligence diagnose models, and provides you with direct feedback on particular features of your presentation skills. So in that sense, it describes and it diagnoses and it enacts the presentation skills and teaching as a system. However, currently, natural language processing is not fast enough to also provide feedback on the actual content of the presentation. So that very specific task is still done by the teacher. So here you see a very clear division of tasks. The teacher is really interested in the actual content of the presentation, whereas the system sort of takes over the task of providing feedback for different elements such as pose, speech, etc. And then finally, full automation systems. There are examples where learners are learning completely with a system. To be totally frank, I don't think that that is going to be the dominant mode within our formal education systems. But within the informal education system, we'll see multiple skills that can in fact be trained by an autonomous system, and that development will increasingly move forward. One example that I think is a really good one is the Aleo system, which is an American system to learn a second language. And here you really see the full automation loop. It's an immersive simulation with an artificial intelligence that speaks to you and understands what you're saying. Based on what you're saying and the analysis of your speech, it provides you with personalized feedback on your progress of the second language. And it provides you with personalized practice that aligns with your current abilities within the second language learning. So what you really see is a fully closed loop, an autonomous system that can detect your current state of language learning, provides you with additional support to move forward, and really steers your learning towards capturing this language. So here the system diagnoses, it describes, it diagnoses, it enacts, and it also really steers the learning. So in that way, it is an autonomous system that can engage with learners without the support of teachers. So this model really is developed to help us think about the different levels at which AI can support education. And again, without having a particular focus on the full automation, it really helps us have a dialogue about what the role of AI in education currently is, where we want to go in the future, how we envision that AI in education interactions with humans. And most importantly, we can also ask a number of ethical questions based on this model. How much data do we want these systems to engage in and to use? And what does that mean for privacy and autonomy, both of the student as well as the teacher? So it helps you to push and think about the way forward with artificial intelligence and education. And that gives me a question for you to think about. Where would you position the technologies that you're working with on the model? So if you think about the artificial intelligence and education technologies that you're currently using in Malaysia, where would those be on the model? And this would be a question that might be interesting to discuss in the end of the keynote. Then what I'd like to do now is move on to discussing the ultimate role of AI in education. So the model gives us an idea of where we stand today and what we can and cannot do. And of course, we're wondering what the ultimate role of AI will be in education. And in order to make those speculations for the future, it's important to think about the critical elements in the advancements around AI in education. And those critical elements lay on our ability to follow learners, track their environments, and provide the artificial intelligence with a full overview of how learners are evolving. It also depends on our ability to diagnose learners' current states and anticipate on their development. So how well are we capable to diagnose what a learner knows, whether they are motivated, regulating, and emotional regulation as well, in order to see if they are actually going to be able to fulfill the learning goals that we have. So this diagnosing ability is really important as well. And then the last step, and I think that's probably even the most important step and the most difficult one, is to apply consequences to the actual diagnosis. So understanding if we diagnose a particular situation around a learner, what does that mean for the best next action in order to optimize their learning? So if we take that away from speech, but translate that into a visual model, there are three critical elements. One element is our ability to detect. How well can we detect where learners are, what they are doing, from all these different aspects that are important to learning? The second one is, if we have the data to detect it, are we capable of diagnosing these critical features that we need to know in order to push forward? And then are we capable of translating that diagnosis into didactical scenarios and actions that actually support our learners to move forward? And if we're capable of optimizing all of these three steps, then we'll probably be able to optimize artificial intelligence in education towards the higher levels of the model. Now, if we talk about detection, detect can be done in many different ways. Currently, we mostly see detection being done with log files, which is a very powerful tool, and mouse and keyboard movements are increasingly used in these systems. What we don't see so much of yet is the use of physiological data, EDA, heart rate, and eye tracking, which you can actually also do relatively well with a video, with a webcam. So eye tracking can give us a lot of additional information on what learners are actually focusing on and extracting their attention motives. And then, of course, there is video and voice that is increasingly captured in learning environments. And also with natural language processing and automatic video assessment, we're increasingly capable of analyzing these data sources as well and providing more contextual information about our learners. So the question is, how much do we use these different detections in our models? And how do we feel about this from an ethical perspective? Where do we draw the line in detection and actual usage of these different data streams? And that's also an important question to address moving forward. Now, if we think about the diagnosis step, we see an increased level of generic algorithms being used to detect the actual knowledge state of a learner. So in order to understand how much a learner knows about a particular situation. Now, the ELO algorithm is used in the Netherlands widely across different adaptive learning technologies in order to assess the current knowledge states. Many intelligent tutoring systems use Bayesian knowledge tracing to develop learner models. And increasingly, we also see developments around knowledge graph technology in order to build learner models based on that in order to see what the optimal learning path could be for different learners. So those are more generic models to understand knowledge development. We also see an increase in context-specific algorithms that detect a very specific aspect of learning. So, for instance, a development that is currently taking on quite a lot of attention is the ability to track students' technical reading with an eye tracking device. And doing that, we can actually assess the technical reading ability from students, which is a skill that is used in primary education quite a lot. and really tries to support students to understand how fast they are learning to read. Similarly, with dyslexia and dysgraphia, there are very specific algorithms that can detect whether students are capable to read successfully and whether students are capable to start writing successfully. And also what we see in very specific algorithms is that they are actually supporting feedback on essay writing. And here it's really interesting because we really see an interaction between human and artificial intelligence, and artificial intelligence taking up particular features from essays and humans providing additional features. And in that loop, humans are actually teaching the artificial intelligence to become better at understanding systems. Now, if we look at the enactment level, and that's going to wrap this up, we're going to see that we're doing a lot of step analysis with these elaborative feedback that I talked about. This is a step that we're slowly moving into, but mostly in structured domains. In less structured domains, it's still quite hard to give elaborate feedback on tasks. So that's probably a development that we're going to see evolve within the next few years. Task feedback is something that we're actually capable of doing relatively well in many domains. Curriculum feedback is still a relatively unexplored domain where we're really trying to see what is the best optimized learning path for individual learners. And increasingly, we also see an interest in that backward moving path because with the pandemic, we see much more diversity between learners, and this actual curriculum tracking is becoming more important. So that gives me another question for you to think about. What, in your view, is the most optimal form of AI in education? What should we strive for within the next decade? And that, again, can be positioned on the model. Now, if we look at scale, there are a number of things that are being used around the globe extensively. For instance, the partial automation that I talked about in adaptive learning technologies that we see used around the globe. As well as intelligent tutoring systems that are increasingly used in primary and secondary education. What we do see is a lot of detection of knowledge. We don't see so many developments around detection of regulations, so how students control and monitor their learning, or emotion and motivation. So those are still developmental horizons for AI in education to be integrated in these systems. Now, if we think about supporting, for instance, self-regulated learning, apart from the data, we can also diagnose how students are learning over time and provide them with explicit information about their own learning process, which then can be translated into personalized dashboards for students to learn how they have developed their learning. And that's exactly what we're doing in this hybrid human AI project, where we're really trying to offload regulation back to learners to support deep and future learning. And we do that by developing increasingly information for learners to see how their learning is evolving over time in order to support moving forward on their own ability to control and monitor their learning. And I think that hybrid AI regulation, where we have the AI regulate to some extent and transfer control back and forth to learners, that is really the challenge that we're looking at large in order to develop that well within our systems. Now, let me wrap this up. The conclusions. Hybrid human AI technologies propose a way to frame and discuss the use of AI in education, so really see it as a system. The role of AI in education can be understood at these 6 levels, describing the roles of the AI, the role of the teacher, and the role of the learner. If we look at existing learning technologies using AI, they are focusing strongly on the detection of knowledge and adjust feedback or tasks or curriculum, but they're typically good at one of these things and not all of these things. Frontiers lie in detecting a larger range of different data sources, diagnosing a broader range of learning characteristics, such as self-regulation, emotion, motivation, and also start using that in the adjustments within these systems. And the integration of multiple data streams offer us a way to detect more learner characteristics and sort of move forward on that ability to really support learners. Recommendations at large: make sure that ethics are governed by design, transparency is upheld so that systems can be easily understood by teachers, and data protection is well organized. Improve learning technologies, especially within public-private partnerships. Make sure that teachers and those using the systems are actually capable of articulating their needs, and activate these teachers and educational professionals in these transitions in order to really push these hybrid human AI learning technologies that can help us find this new frontiers. And of course, all of the work that I've been presenting has been done together with the Adaptive Learning Lab. And I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues in all the different works that we've been doing around the topics. So thank you very much for your attention. And now I would like to open the floor for questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Inge, for giving such informative information to all of us. And we enjoy it a lot, especially Dr. Inge share with us about the role of AI in education to inform, to diagnose the problem, and to inform the actionable information, and also the decision, and also describe and mirror student behavior, give feedback to the student using AI, and to inform us what to do next in the education. Besides that, Dr. Ingang also shared with us about the 6 levels of automation of personalized learning model and the ultimate role of AI, which is about the advancement in personalization learning. And there are 3 critical elements such as detect, diagnose, and act, as well as the assisting learning technology as example. So let us proceed with our Q&A session. And I believe that there are some questions from our audience. So Will, let me share with you the first question. Okay, the first question comes from Vani. The question is, will shifting or moving to artificial intelligence spell the fall of the human intellect?
Maybe at the end. I think, of course, there's a lot of talk in Silicon Valley about this singularity and the idea that human intelligence will be taken over by artificial intelligence. Currently, I'm not that worried about it. If we look at the scope of what artificial intelligence can actually do within the arena of education, you see it's still relatively limited. We're quite well capable of understanding the development of students from a knowledge perspective, but not so much from the whole broad student perspective. So we don't really know much about the regulation, the motivation, the emotional regulation of students. And that all comes together when we want to address learning at a larger scale. So for the next decade, I think we'll have systems developing that will help us do these quests and understand humans learning better. But I'm not worried about AI taking over human learning at this point in time or within the next decade. But of course, some people are disagreeing with me on that.
Okay, thank you for the answer. Now we have a second question. Actually, this question is come from me. So this question is a job automation could be a threat. Yeah. So some people are concerned or worried about the job replacement by machine, robot, or technology tools. So in your opinion, how will this impact the educated job or other professions?
It is in fact true that some aspects of the job of the teachers will be automated. And I think that is actually good because teachers are known to be well overwhelmed with all the jobs that they have to do. So they're under a lot of pressure. They have a lot of different jobs that they have to do concurrently while they are teaching or while they are supporting learners to evolve. So I think if we have a dialogue with teachers, and that's why I also think this dialogue aspect is really important, and with professionals in the educational arena, we can really start to think about which are the tasks that you want to transfer to the system and which are the tasks that are profoundly human that you really feel essential to do yourself. So really try to find that balance between what are the tasks that are well done by machines and what are the tasks that are critical for humans. Have that dialogue and make sure that those tasks that we transfer to the system are in fact those tasks that they would not like to do themselves, or support the tasks that they find really critical. So if I have a better understanding of how my students are learning and where they are in the learning process, and that understanding is given to me by the system, I, as a teacher, can interact in a much more meaningful way with my students. And that makes the feedback process or the dialogue that I have with my students more powerful. So in that sense, we're actually putting teachers in their best behavior and their best abilities. And we need to develop systems that are capable of doing that. So really think from that perspective. We really want the system to help the teacher and then help the teacher move forward in his job. And in that sense, I think there will be a transfer of jobs from the teacher to the system, but the teacher will also really see that advanced benefit of using systems. And if we can resolve that challenge, then I think the automation is well done.
Yes, it's good. It's good. All right. So move on to another question. So this question from Aisha Mohammed Noor. Thank you for insightful presentation. And will you suggest on how to start learning analytics at teacher level? I mean, as course instructor, and we know that the success of LA and AI require all individuals in the institution.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you're a course instructor, you really want to think from that perspective that I just described. So really think about your day-to-day practice and think about those tasks that take a lot of your time, but are not particularly, well, maybe they are useful, but not particularly rewarding, and that you can easily transfer to a system. So I'm quite sure that you spend quite a lot of your time reading work from your students, trying to give them feedback. And in some ways, the system can really help you process that information faster, understand where your students stand, and help you providing feedback that is really meaningful for students. So I really try to find that balance. So as an instructor and a course designer, and that's what I do when I teach myself as well, I really try to think about the tasks that I could transfer to the system that would help me as a teacher do my job in a better way. So that's what I would do first, and then start seeing what data you're already collecting. So what data do you have in the detection mode? How could you diagnose that automatically? And then see how that would inform your actions as a teacher. So really try to think from that cycle, from the detection, the diagnose, to what it means for you, for the actions that you would do as a teacher, given the information that you have. I hope that helps.
I think we can apply with the three critical elements: the detect, diagnose, and aid. If you are
Yeah.
an instructor, yeah, right. Okay, thank you. So let us move on another question. So this question come from Zaki Yamani Zakaria. The question is there any chance where AI can be integrated with Discord or Stack, or have it been done?
But that's a really good question, Zaki. I know some of my colleagues are integrating AI modules in Zoom. So they're actually detecting automatic Zoom classes, seeing who's taking the floor, who's adding to the group discussion. So there are, in fact, plugins for Zoom. I'm not really sure if there's a plugin for Discord. I'm also not 100% sure how much information you can easily distract from Discord. So that's probably the thing that you want to track out first. Is there an open data API in Discord or in Slack where you can actually extract the data and start playing around with an artificial intelligence? What you can definitely do is take out the messages and use different analysis modules where you can analyze the tone of voice, the type of interaction that students are engaging in, and maybe even also understand the interaction patterns between students better from these generic platforms. So yes, if you can get the data out in an easy way and use different diagnose modules from that you can get from the internet as well, you can easily plug it in.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So this will be the last question before closing our statement today. Right. So this question is: how can university do and prepare to welcome and be ready to adapt to an AI-enabled world? And what is the essential policy, plan, or strategies to meet the demands and to achieve the objective?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think universities around the globe are still struggling with this question. It's a little bit similar to the questions that have been addressed around learning analytics over the last decade. So I would definitely advise people also to have a look at a wide set of policy documents that have been made available through SOLAR, the learning analytics community, to think about learning analytics, because in many ways, there are similar steps. You really have to think about your data data security or the data landscape that you have, the infrastructure, make sure that it's available, and also be able to understand what you can diagnose from the data that you have. So here we go back to the Detect, Diagnose, Act, and think how you want to act. But more importantly, from a university perspective, is also to think about your ethics policies. How do you want to deal with data? Who owns the data? Who has authority to analyze it? And who can use the data for the enactment? So really think about it from a policy perspective. Think about what the agreements are that you make around data within the university. And then start moving forward, building that data infrastructure, start using the diagnosis modules, and start using all these great instructors that you have to use that information and push this development forward. At the end of the day, it's the teachers in your university that are going to make a difference using AI. So really try to do that collaborative effort within your institutions.
Yeah, I agree with that. And maybe we can have some sharing the data bank among the university to diagnose and to detect the behavior of the student, and then to inform the actionable decision. Like, for example, we come out the intervention or treatment, etc. Huh?
Okay. Absolutely. And also don't forget your students. So if you're diagnosing them, check with them if that feels as if you're diagnosing them correctly, and also if they feel comfortable with the diagnosis. So I think including students in this dialogue next to instructors is really important to make sure that you're actually doing this in a profound and valid way.
Okay, yeah, Doctor. Before we end our session today, can you give some take-home message for our audience?
This is a really exciting time. Artificial intelligence is really going to shake up the field within the next decade. And as we were, for instance, 10, 20 years ago with the emergence of internet, we were really on this fluid stage where we can really make a difference in how the next generation will learn. And I feel that currently we're in the similar fluid state where we really are going to see how AI is going to transfer our education landscape. So take your role and start helping developing that education of the future, because this is the moment to do it. So please, everybody, connect in, start working and thinking about this. And I hope this keynote give you a first idea to work with that.
Yes, absolutely. We need to take the first step and initiative to make it happen. All right. Thank you so much, Doctor. Yeah, thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, so this is the end of our keynote session. So on behalf of NALI program, I would like to say thank you to our honor speaker, Dr. Inge. Right? And it is a friendly reminder that the next session will be the closing ceremony of NALI 2021 at 3:30 p.m. tomorrow. And with this, it marks the end of today's workshop. Thank you and see you again.